Westwood One presents America at Night. Here's your host, McGraw Milhaven.
It's a Wednesday night. A little rhythm of the river here for you. All right, we got a busy show for you tonight. First up, well, let's work backwards. First, open phones in hour number 3. In hour number 2, there is a new book out about the U.S. Postal Service, and we're going to talk to the director of the National Postal Museum about the United States Postal Service and how it built a nation, part of the 250th anniversary of the United States Postal Service. That's in hour number 2. A little bit later on in this hour, The Hill has a story out tonight. Just recently, a new report warning that Chinese-produced cellular phones, tiny components that are inside smart home devices, present a significant national security risk for the United States. They're saying that, these Chinese-produced devices can be listening to you in your home. Doorbells, refrigerators, thermostats among the devices. We'll talk to the author of that report who broke that story. But this first half of this first hour, Ed Martin, who is a somewhat controversial figure in the Trump administration. He was a U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C. He has since moved offices and is now President Trump's pardon attorney. And he is a longtime friend, and so we kept on inviting him on the show. And lo and behold, I kept on expecting him to say no, and the other day he said, sure, I'll come on. And so hang tight. When we come back, we are going to talk to Ed Martin, somewhat controversial, much in the news, hasn't spoken much, if at all, publicly about President Trump and the pardons and some of the controversies that are associated with that. But he's nice enough to join us tonight on America at Night. So we took him up on his offer. So stay right there. When we come back, Donald Trump's pardon attorney, Ed Martin, straight ahead on America at Night. Back in a moment.
From the heart of America, this is America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. This is America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
Well, Ed Martin was the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and he has since moved over to the Pardon Office. And he also is a longtime friend of the show. I've known Ed Martin for going on 20 years now. He's been on the show numerous times. He is never a dull interview. He is a devout Catholic, and he joins us now for a couple of minutes. Ed Martin, welcome to America at Night.
Well, McGraw, it's great to hear your voice, and you buried the lead a little bit. Remember, for years I would go, I think, on Sundays and then other times and try to do radio, and I never made it in radio, so I had to become a senior Department of Justice official in the Trump administration. But, we all do what we're going to do, and we make our way. But it's great and the other thing, McGraw, I'm like the greatest salesman. I don't sell any books. But I tell people about that book, The Tender Bar. Of course, you're the star with your cousin. He wrote the book. But the book is better than the movie, in my opinion. The book is so good. And I tell people all the time about that and about you and everything else. So it's great. I'm glad you're across the country. I'm glad people are listening to you. You're a wise guy, even though you're not as old as you sound. But it's great to be with you.
Well, you're very nice of you to say. And, yes, I agree with everything you said just there. So we're starting off on the right point. There you go. Good stuff.
There you go.
All right, let's get to it, because as the pardon attorney, you sent me this article you wrote for a magazine called The Chronicles, and the title of it is Understanding Mercy in the Trump Era. You hold a very important role as a pardon attorney, because Donald Trump, I think we can all agree, looks at pardons a little differently. What have you been charged to do, and how are you looking at your job as a pardon attorney in the Trump era?
Well, and one thing that McGraw, that the listeners, if you think about this, when I say it, it will make sense. Because he was out of office for 4 years, he had a lot of time to think about how he was president before. So he's come back now with a sense of the job. You know what? We all have had a job where years later we look back and say, man, I wish I could have done this or that or the other thing differently. So when it comes to the Trump administration and pardons, Donald Trump did a lot of things. You know me, McGraw, I'm a pretty conservative guy. And Donald Trump, in many ways, is not a right-winger like me, conservative like me. And in the first term, he had a whole vision for criminal justice reform that really has, it's called the First Step Act, which is gets people out of jail faster and gets them a second chance faster. Well, when it comes to this second Trump term, he is using the pardon with a lot more, whether you like who he's pardoning, he's using it as a tool regularly, as opposed to waiting till the end of the term, which is what most presidents do. So the first day on the job, I was U.S. attorney in D.C., which is where these cases were. He pardoned all of the J6 defendants. And on the third day, he pardoned 2 cops who had been convicted and jailed over chasing a perp. And the guy ran out in the streets and got hit by a car. And they said, you're not supposed to chase somebody like that. And they put him in jail. And then the fourth day on the job, he pardoned all of the pro-life little grandmas that were saying a rosary in front of the pro-life clinic. And that was the first week. And then over time, he's done all sorts of other things. And my point is he's kind of a second chance guy. And if I say it like this, if you're a guy that's gone bankrupt, had ups and downs, had multiple marriages, you know that your life doesn't end when you fail. In fact, it's the opposite. You got another chance. And so he's kind of done that. And for me, as a pardon attorney, it's given me a chance to talk to him, Donald Trump, in a way that's a little different than policy discussions. It's, what is his preference? Because, and the last thing I'll say, McGraw, sorry for the long answer, is America's Constitution has a very unique pardon power. It's completely plenary, meaning you can do it for any reason or no reason, good reason or bad reason, and constantly makes people think, way back since the founding, that the president did it because that's his friend or that's his crony or his business partner. And maybe there's some of that, maybe there isn't. Doesn't matter because it's completely legal. Joe Biden doesn't have to justify the auto pen or anything else. He can pardon whoever he wants, and he did. He pardoned Hunter, he pardoned Fauci, he pardoned Milley. So it's really interesting. And in a world where, reason I wrote this piece you mentioned, in a world where mercy is not necessarily something we naturally, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the virtues and mercy. I thought it was an interesting way to see what was going on when you talk about a second chance.
Well, Ed Martin, obviously they don't let you out enough because you haven't talked to the media in a while. You're just getting revved up, I can see.
It's true.
Do you bring pardon ideas to the president, or does the president bring pardon ideas to you? How does that work?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So I tell people that come into the office, the process, I say, look, I have a website, the Pardon Office, file a pardon application. It means if you want a full pardon, that means you make it go away completely. If you want to just get out of jail, that's called a commutation. There's actually an aspect of the pardon power that's restitution, it's called rescission, getting rid of restitution, like if you owed a big fine. All these are possible. So you fill out an application, you get a pardon application, it gets on the system. We run a background check. We make sure that somebody that's saying, hey, I'm a good guy, I deserve a second chance, really deserves it. Do they have any other crimes, any other issues? And then it goes over to the White House. At that point, you're trying to get the attention of the president because, as you point out, he could do it if he wants, but he's busy. And he's got lots of people. And so it's a little of both. I have, when I first got the job, he talked to me about 2 categories. He said, I want more second chances, people that got like a 50-year sentence. They've been away for 35 and they've turned their life around. Let's get them out. And then he also said, having lived it, he said the people that got roughed up by prosecutors who were out of hand, so-called weaponization, he's like, I want you to find those guys and gals. So that's the categories. But a lot of people come into the process and they say, oh, I was Donald Trump's roommate in college, and here's my friend, he deserves a pardon, or I'm a big businessman, or whatever. So what I do think we do to serve him is to discipline the process to try to get him all the types of candidates, not just people that can get his attention. But it kind of goes both ways. And he has shown an openness. Sometimes he wanted to help the cops. He thought that these two cops in D.C. were unjustly imprisoned. But, sometimes he also thinks these drug crimes where somebody gets, 80 years for a nonviolent drug crime, those things that kind of make him a little crazy. So there's a range of things, and it kind of goes all different ways.
Ed Martin, you know this, that when somebody accepts a pardon, they are admitting guilt. And you can...
That's not true. No, that's not true. I got to tell you, that's not true.
Oh.
This is fake news, but here's why. Let me explain to you. In 1915 or so, there was a Supreme Court case called Burdick versus U.S. Burdick was a publisher, and the President of the United States at the time issued a preemptive pardon saying Burdick deserves a pardon, here it is. And Burdick says, I don't accept the pardon. And Burdick went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, in order for a pardon to be operative, you have to accept it. If you don't accept it, it doesn't work. Now, but then the judge went on and he said, and by the way, I've been thinking about this, and I think if you accept a pardon, well, that probably means you're guilty of something. But that was not the actual holding. And a few years ago, that case went up into the courts, and the court said, no, there has to be people that are innocent that get a pardon. It can't be that if you take the pardon, you're saying you're guilty. Like, you can't legally make that true. It may imply that to the public's ear and eye. Now, here's where it gets interesting, McGraw. In 1975, it must have been that's the years right, President Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon. And when he pardoned him, he sent a lawyer out to California. And the lawyer went out with a copy of the Burdick case. And the lawyer said to Nixon, if you accept this, it's gonna mean you're guilty. And Nixon didn't want to do that. And so he didn't put out a statement that said he was guilty. And Ford, for the rest of his life, would be asked about the Nixon pardon, and he would take out that case, and he would argue, no, see, it means he was guilty. But that's not the holding. It may be what we feel, right? But it's not the legal holding. And Nixon maintained to his death. He's like, I messed up their cover-up. I messed up things, but I didn't commit a crime. He argued, he would go into a different thing. And but it certainly implies that. And look, when Fauci was asking for a pardon in the last days of the Biden administration, you say, well, does he think he's guilty of something, or is he covering his tail because he's worried about, prosecutors going wild? And I think it doesn't really matter. You can have your opinion, but that's kind of the background on that.
Okay, so that's it. So when did this change happen? Because that didn't get a lot of news when it happened. I thought that would have probably made more news recently.
Well, it mostly just became understood because there's not a place where you actually say, on the dotted line, when you take this pardon, you're admitting guilt. That was sort of just the way people thought about it. And by the way, there are people that will still argue that way. They'll say, no, it does mean that. But that's not a Supreme Court holding. And just from a matter of logic, let's just say it like this. There has to be someone in this country who is wrongly imprisoned. And when you give that guy a pardon, it doesn't mean he thinks he's guilty. Again, it may imply that in the public's eye. And so anyway, it's a distinction without a difference in the sense that once you get a pardon, whether you're guilty or not, whether you did the crime or not, you're now under the law no longer guilty of that crime. So it doesn't matter. What matters to me is what's surprising to me was when they never said that. They never made the argument about that until Nixon. Then they made it about Nixon, and then now they didn't make it about Fauci. Nobody is saying about Fauci that he admitted he did something. That's why he accepted a pardon. If he did nothing illegal, he could have said, I don't want a pardon. I don't need it. But instead he said, I'll take it because I don't want to get jerked around, which is another indictment of our system.
Well, right. But I mean, if Fauci accepts the pardon, the way it was explained to me was he's admitting some type of guilt. But let me ask you this question. So has anybody while you were in the pardon office that you know of reject a pardon from President Trump?
Good question, McGraw. When the J6 stuff happened, one or more people said they weren't going to accept it, but I don't know if they actually rejected it. In other words, the way it would come up and the way it came up in a recent court case was there was a civil action. Somebody sued a guy over a transaction, a broken business deal, and they wanted to bring into the case the fact that he got a pardon to impute his guilt and therefore his bad character. The court said, no, you can't do that because it doesn't say that. But otherwise, there's no formal moment where I send you the pardon. I say, hey, McGraw Milhaven, here's the pardon signed by President Trump, and I wait for you to send back the receipt on the bottom. That doesn't happen. So there were 2 or 3 people that said they weren't accepting it, but I don't think they ever went into court in a way that mattered, that there was something that they needed to say, yeah, I'm not doing it. So I don't know formally in my time if there's been someone that has formally done that. But there's been people that have said something like that. But I can tell you, like Fauci's lawyer accepted. Fauci got pardoned at like 10 in the morning on Inauguration Day. The president swears in at noon. And at 10:30, his lawyer said, here's a signed letter saying I accept. So, it's for Fauci, he made sure they accepted.
Ed Martin, I got 2 minutes, and then I got to take a break, and we'll hold you back on the other side of the break. Last week, President Trump said that he was contemplating issuing blanket pardons. Donald Trump says a lot of things, but who knows if he was serious or not. But here's my question, and could you brought up Richard Nixon. Could Richard Nixon have issued blanket pardons to his staff, his advisors, and even himself, and avoid Gerald Ford's pardon?
Well, I know less than 2 minutes. So yes to anyone else. Yes, he could. The president, again, it's a plenary power. He could pardon his chief of staff. Nixon could have Haldeman, Ehrlichman, anybody. There is a debate about whether you can pardon yourself. The president can pardon himself. That is a debate. It's never been done, so it's not tested. My instinct is that you could, because it's a plenary power. It's designed. You go back to the founders and the Federalist Papers. They were really doing it as a stabilizing agent, that the president can, if things are getting crazy, you can do this to try to stabilize things, to quell, a kind of dissension and fear. And so I kind of think, but that's a debatable one, the president pardoning himself, but everyone else he could. I mean, and Joe Biden went further than anyone else had by pardoning Hunter, for the last 10 years for anything. Usually pardon you for your conduct while you were, serving as deputy chief of staff on these sets of issues. Or on this questionable issue, it's usually more targeted. But I think it's plenary, and I think you can make the argument. You can sort of make it as broad as you want if you're the president, and I think it would hold up.
See, that's why he's good at radio. I give him 2 minutes, and he does just about 2 minutes. See, he still has his radio genes in him. That is Ed Martin, and he's all fired up tonight. He is Donald Trump's pardon attorney. He was a U.S. attorney, and they've now moved him over to the pardon office, and he's having a chance to talk with us about all of these types of things. Ed Martin, hold that break. We will come back. Ed Martin with us for another segment, and we're talking about pardons, because it is such a big topic of conversation. We'll come back and talk about some of the other things Ed Martin has been in the news for. He's always controversy. He's always controversial. Controversy follows him no matter what. We'll talk to Ed Martin about that coming up here in just a minute. America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. We're just getting started. Back in a moment.
You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. Welcome to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
Ed Martin is our guest for a couple of more minutes. He was a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. He's now a pardon attorney for President Trump, and he joins us now for a couple minutes. Ed Martin, okay, controversy finds you wherever you go. I know you enough to know that you're innocent, and it just so happens you're standing on a street corner minding your own business, and controversy finds you.
Exactly.
What's the story? What's the story where you were found outside of Attorney General Letitia James's house wearing a trench coat, taking pictures? What were you doing? What was going on?
Wait a second. That sounds even more nefarious than it was. Wait a second. Look, one of my roles in the administration has been to take a look at a series of referrals that had to do with mortgage fraud. And this is publicly reported, so I'm not saying anything that is not outside of public reported. And one of them was the Letitia James, the Attorney General. There was some issues around some property she had. The photos that you mentioned of me there, first of all, I happen to wear a trench coat. That's my, something since I lived out here in the swamp last few years. I wear that regularly, but that's sort of a different story. But that's where I was there. That was the property, one of her properties. And so we happened to be in Brooklyn for something else. And I went by one of the allegations in that case, again, publicly reported, was the number of units that were being rented out and what was happening. So beyond that case is actually handled in a different part of the department, once it gets past a certain point. So that was what got me into the New York Post, I think it was. But it is what it is, and you kind of just keep moving.
Which leads me to this next line of questioning. During the Biden administration, there was a lot of criticism.
Yes.
Towards President Biden for turning the Justice Department into lawfare and using it as a political weapon. And similarly, there's criticism of the Trump administration for doing now the same thing to his political enemies and or opponents. Where does this end? Is this now standard operating procedure from now on? Whoever's in the Oval Office is going to use the Justice Department for their own personal use?
Well, at first, a general observation, right? There is something called prosecutorial discretion, right? So every prosecutor can make a preference, can decide what they care about within a range, and so that's going to be different prosecutors are going to have different priorities, and the President of the United States, as the director of the Department of Justice, gets to give us some direction. I would say one of the things I was asked to do was look at the Biden administration's efforts to weaponize the government, and specifically how they handled the January 6 cases, how they handled the Jack Smith special counsel. And I've looked at that, and there'll be some reports that are coming out in the next few months on that work. And I would just say that, for example, on January 6th, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the January 6th prosecutions by the Biden administration were wrong as to the law. They used a law that was never used the way it was, and they put people in jail for that. And it really, you look at the emails and all, it's pretty vicious and targeted. And I think that's different than deciding you're going to say everyone's going to be held accountable as to, say, mortgage fraud. If you commit mortgage fraud, McGraw, you're going to be on the hot seat if somebody figures it out. It doesn't matter if you're a big radio star or not. And likewise, I think that's what happened to Letitia James and others. But I do think you bring up a good point. I mean, if we descend into a system where it's just every time you get in power, you go after your enemies, that's not America. But I think that really accelerated under Joe Biden more than anyone else. You look at that administration, and I'm in the administration. I'm in the Department of Justice. I don't see that from us. I don't see us targeting. Look, I became U.S. attorney. One of the things I looked at was whether Chuck Schumer crossed over a line when he said about Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, "You're going to reap the whirlwind." He stood on the steps of the Supreme Court, and he seemed to threaten them. And I looked at it, and people said, "You should charge him." And I said, "It's not a crime." Like, it may be maybe terrible, it may be untoward, it may be nasty. It's not a crime. And I remember one of these people called me and said, "You must charge him." It was not someone in the administration. I said, "You know what you're talking about. I'm not. That's not how we do this." So it's a balance. Last thing I'll say, McGraw, I worry that we have lost the decency of the men and women in the legal system because too often, and I'm going to sound like I'm talking against myself because I'm in the Department of Justice, the prosecutors have too much power, and they stomp on the American people. And we've got to get that balance right. And we need more lawyers and judges who say, don't just win, but do the right thing. And I'm talking about sentencing. I'm talking about, regular folks. I'm talking about some of the ways things have gone. So it is a precarious moment, and I think it's one that it's good you're asking that question. It's good you're pushing because we all have to be held accountable.
Ed Martin, last question for you, and I will start where we'll finish where we started with the mercy of the pardon, and I think very much like Donald Trump, I've said this before, it is a Rorschach test. People see he does something, and somebody sees one thing, and somebody else sees something else, and there's no doubt that he's done some pretty merciful things and pardoned some people who clearly needed to be pardoned. And I'm thinking of the Darryl Strawberries of the world, right? I mean, he paid his dues.
Yeah.
He's changed his life around, and there's a long litany of people like Darryl Strawberry that have been pardoned. But then he goes on and pardons the founder of ByteDance, who his family has some type of financial dealings with going forward. And it just sort of soils the process. Talk about that for a minute, and how it looks, and he's so good in some ways and yet causes controversy in other ways.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to ask that question, because there's some of that. There's some people say, well, wait a second. Alice Johnson is the pardon czar. She's a woman who was sentenced for being a driver on a drug case to like 40 years. She served 28. He pardoned her in the first term. She's amazing. And she helps find people that are similar to her. And you say, well, gosh, the guy has a heart for that. He does that. Nobody was advocating for that woman, and Trump figured it out and did it. Wow. But in other times, as you point out, there's somebody who's a big developer who has a tax issue and he gets a pardon. You say, does that guy deserve it the same way that Alice Johnson did? That's always been the history of pardon. You sort of take the good with the bad. And I think what I argue to people is, let's just be transparent about it. There's not a reason that I can give for any one of them. In fact, I don't, by rule, I don't say, I will say this about Darryl Strawberry, by the way. I will tell a story on that. The president went up to Yankee Stadium for a game. And who's the president of the Yankees? McGraw, what's his name? Levine? Is that his name?
Brian Cashin? Mark Levine? Brian Cashman is one, but the other guy is like the president. His name is, I think it's Levine or something. Anyway, the president was saying, is there anything I can help you guys with, which is a standard line from President Trump. And he said, Darryl Strawberry it'd be great if he got a pardon because he's really cleaned up his act. And the president came back from that visit to Yankee Stadium and said, and I was happy as could be, look, I wanted the president to pardon the Black Sox, the Black Sox, because the White Sox. This is funny in this week, because the Pope is a White Sox fan, and when he met the Pope, he could say, hey, you can forgive their sins, but I pardoned them. It turns out that the jury nullified. They never got convicted. Did you know that? Shoeless Joe Jackson was never convicted. He was acquitted. It's just he was suspended by baseball. So anyway, Pete Rose, posthumously, we haven't actually signed the paperwork. The president said he wants to do it, so that'll get done. Darryl Strawberry, in the first term, he did Jack Johnson, the famous boxer. So he likes to do some of these ones that are symbolic too. But I'm for more transparency about it. That it's something that's just the preference of the president. Back to my point on the mercy, it is a little bit like a king. It is a little bit like Christ. I mean, nobody deserves it because the power is so plenary. It just happens. And like you said, if you don't like Trump, you think it's frustrating. But if you like Trump, you're like, wow, look at that guy. He doesn't care. He's just going to do what he thinks is good for some people and let the chips fall where they may. The president of the New York Yankees is Randy Levine. Or Levine. Randy
Levine. That's the guy who did it. Yeah, thank you. That's right.
Yeah, I'm here for you, Ed Martin. Ed Martin, look, it's good to hear your voice. It's good to see you back on the field, in the arena. Stay safe. Don't get caught wearing a trench coat on the corner in New York City again.
All right, okay.
And be safe, and we'll talk to you down the road, Ed Martin. Thanks for checking in.
Thanks, McGraw. Good to talk to you. See you.
All right, good. Ed Martin was a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. He is now the pardon attorney for President Trump. And I don't know if he made news or not, but that was a pretty riveting conversation, in my humble opinion. I thought it was Ed Martin's never dull. You might not like him. You might love him. You might not like him. But the man is never dull. And he's, well, anyway. All right, we got a break. Because there was a breaking story tonight from The Hill in which there was a story that Chinese technology in doorbells and refrigerators and things like that are listening to Americans. We'll come back and talk about that. America at Night, back in a moment.
America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. This is America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
All right, The Hill has a story tonight, late-breaking story about Chinese-produced home devices that could present a significant national security risk. The author of this article is Filip Timotija. Filip, welcome to America at Night.
Well, thank you for having me.
What's this report? What are they actually saying, and what should we be worried about here?
Well, this is a brand new report I got my hands on earlier today, and it's from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is a Washington-based think tank. And they say in the new report that the Chinese produce cellular models, which are tiny components that are inside smart home devices, refrigerators, thermostats, present a significant national security risk for the United States. And what the report says is that two Chinese firms, Quoitel and Fibocom, control nearly half of the global market of these modules.
And what are they saying? That your refrigerator is listening to you in your kitchen?
Well, the FTD in the report, they're saying that these modules that are within the devices, because modules are used to effectively connect the device to either a 4G or 5G network in a case of a Wi-Fi outage. And those features create both espionage and sabotage risks, because they can provide a backdoor for China to potentially deactivate these modules, because they still have access to these devices through both hardware and software updates.
So they can get to my phone through my refrigerator, through my smart refrigerator.
It doesn't necessarily apply to all devices, but ports, even hospitals, power grids, cranes, and other transportation networks rely on these cellular models. But in theory, these modules could shut down their host devices, and also they could potentially collect large amounts of data, because the manufacturer maintains that remote access that I was mentioning earlier, because of these software updates. And that is what the FTD is saying in this new report. And they're also saying that these modules are found in doorbells, refrigerators, thermostats, and other devices.
So in a sense, they haven't used it yet. From reading your story in the Hill, it sounds like it's available to them, but they haven't used it yet.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. It is unclear if they've used it in terms of information collection or shutting down devices. But another risk that both the FDD report and previous congressional investigations point to is that these companies are related to the PLA, the Chinese military, because one of the companies is affiliated with a Chinese-owned satellite company that provides satellite imagery, communication, and other benefits to the Chinese military.
And tell me who again made this report, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Who are they? Are they a think tank? Are they part of the government? Who are they?
So the FTD is a Washington-based think tank, and they do a lot of research focused on U.S. national security. And they're in general described as pro-Israel, pro-Ukraine, and they are also very hawkish on Iran.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is the same argument that came up with TikTok, right? Why do we want China to know and to be able to infiltrate our phones and have algorithms that show us what they want us to know? And so they have access to our brains, our phones. Now they have access to our doorbells and our refrigerators. And whether it's you and me or, as you mentioned, airports and hospitals and power grids and cranes and transportation networks and even, red lights, green lights, they can cause mass chaos at any time they want to.
Right. And that is also why early last year, the Pentagon has designated one of the companies, Quoitel, as a Chinese military company operating in the U.S. But this new report that I got my hands on also is recommending three other things: that Congress should compel the Pentagon to do an audit of its infrastructure to essentially identify potential embedded Chinese cellular models. The report is also recommending that Congress should ban the Pentagon from procuring these Chinese cellular models, and that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, should place Chinese cellular model manufacturers on its so-called cover list, which is a list that would then bar the companies from authorizing or making sales within the United States.
Yeah. Do we know what name brands these are? And is there any way to sort of turn it off or rip it out of our doorbell or our refrigerator or anything else?
Well, for now, it's clear. We've seen some research on this front. There was a recent study done by RAND Corporation. We had a few congressional investigations, but so far we haven't seen specific brands, or at least brands mentioned in this new report.
Yeah. So we don't know the names, but there's also no way to sort of get my doorbell and turn that device off, right? It's there, and China can turn it on. I can't turn it off.
They potentially could, since the module that is within the device is subject to software updates, and because these software updates are linked to the manufacturer, and most of nearly half the market is occupied by these two Chinese companies, then yes, in theory, that could transpire.
Yeah, that's why when people say, I think my phone's listening to me, stories like this, and even though they say, no, they're not listening to you, people believe they're listening to you because of stories exactly like this. This article by our guest, Filip Timotija, is with The Hill, and it's a new report that these cellular modules from Chinese companies are in our home devices, whether it's refrigerators, doorbells, and the like. New report out there in The Hill. Filip, thanks for checking in. Good stuff.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Filip Timotija is with us from The Hill. Late breaking story broke earlier this evening, and we thought it was interesting and wanted to get him on to talk about it because this is something everybody's thinking about, right? I don't know. We would never allow Nazi Germany to own our radio stations back in 1940. But for some reason, we allow China into our homes and our electrical grid and everything else. It's bizarre. All right, stay right there. We're just getting started. We're going to talk about the Postal Service and the 250 years and how the Postal Service built this country. Our executive director is Alex Hinton. Our engineer tonight is Richard Good. I'm McGraw Milhaven, and this is America at Night on Westwood One.
Westwood One presents America at Night. Here's your host, McGraw Milhaven.
All right. We're going to talk about the post office because the post office, though it's going through some current problems and some issues, it helped build America. And our guest has written a brand new book, came out late last year, called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. James Bruns joins us. James, thanks for joining us on America at Night.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
You betcha. You were a curator for the Smithsonian Institute, and they hired you. And so you spent your career studying and learning and knowing all about the Postal Service?
Not only that, but I followed my father as a curator. He was a curator of postal history for the Smithsonian Institution before I was. And when he died, I applied for his job and won it fair and square.
What is it? Were you following in your father's footsteps, or did you also develop a love for the post office?
I followed my father pretty much. He was an assistant to the Assistant Postmaster General during the Eisenhower administration. We've had a love of the Postal Service. My father was a philatelist. I was a philatelist. And he was more interested in stamps. I was more interested in postal history.
Interesting. What is a philatelist?
It's a stamp collector.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
He
All right,
served
good.
as the nation's stamp collector.
All right, good. So we're getting it straight from the source. The book is called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. Take me all the way back, James, to 1775, a fledgling country, and one of the first things they do is start the Postal Service?
That's correct. They needed a mail service to keep the Continental Army and Congress connected. In fact, the first postal employee, Ebenezer Hazard, his job was to march along with the Army to keep Congress informed of all the military operations so that if there was a downturn or a misfortune, the Congress could move out of the way and get to safety. So he had to trudge along with the Continental Army because Congress wouldn't give him a horse. He had to carry all of his belongings, all of his postal stuff on his shoulder and trudge through the snow and the mud and everything else to keep the nation connected in that way. And then from that, because we were a new country and expanding population, the Postal Service had charge to keep the American people connected.
What did they do before this? How did they get mail to and from before the Postal Service?
A sender would send their mail by British packet, and the British had a postal service in the colonies that was fairly effective. Ben Franklin was the deputy postmaster general for the northern colonies before independence. So he knew what it took to create a post office department. The only problem with the British system, one of the many problems actually, was that the British system, they snooped in the mail. They had no qualms opening people's mail to finding out if you were a loyalist or if you were a revolutionary. And one of the things Franklin did was assure the sanctity of the seal. When a sender seals that letter, the only people that can open it are dead letter clerks. And that's if it goes astray and they need to open it to figure out how to get it to its recipient.
Did they know at the time that the British were reading the mail?
Sure. Letters were coming open.
Oh, my goodness. Like modern-day hackers, the British.
Well, the other thing, too, is that the colonial mails were delivered to taverns and newspapers and coffee houses, and some postmasters would throw them out on the table. And as long as the recipient, somebody would pay the postage, which is the way it was back then, you could take somebody else's letter if you really wanted to.
Yeah. So when it got started, was it popular? Was it hard to sort of get going? What was the thought of the colonists at the time?
It was basically for business correspondence because the mail was so extremely expensive to send by the British, under the British system and during the colonial period, that very few individuals would send personal letters, and only those that had the means would send through the mail.
How much was a stamp back in 1775?
There was no stamp. It was marked on the letter whether or not you paid or not, and it was in pennyweights of silver. It was extremely expensive. Stamps didn't come along until, for this country, 1847.
Oh. What about, like, postmen? Did they have postmen then, too, or how did that work?
No, McGraw, there were no postmen. You would go to the post office to send and receive your mail. There were some places where you could pay extra and get somebody to bring your mail to you, but the letter carrier didn't begin in our country until 1863.
Oh. And James Bruns, our guest, the book is called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. The book is wonderful because it's not written as a novel or a nonfiction. It's written as you have pictures of artifacts and history and little nuggets of information. So it's a wonderful, I don't want to call it a coffee table book, but more or less you can pick it up and put it down whenever you want.
it really tells all kinds of little vignettes and intimate stories about the American people and how they've used the mail and how the mail has responded to the needs of the American people in all kinds of adversities and in all kinds of unpleasantness. The mail has always been there for us. As example, when we talk about the letter carrier bringing the mail to your house, that didn't begin until 1863, as I said. And it started because at that time, women and young ladies whose husbands or boyfriends were serving in the Federal Army during the Civil War would have to go to the post office and send their letters to their husbands or boyfriends who were away in military service. And more often as not, they would be asked to wait, and the clerk would go in the back and come back with a packet of letters previously written unopened by the young lady with a note from the adjutant of the company where the young man was serving saying he's dead. And these young ladies were in a business part of town, unaccompanied in many cases, and they were getting the worst possible news. So the postmaster of Cleveland, Ohio, asked the Postmaster General, Montgomery Blair at the time, is there nothing we can do to ease the agony of these suffering women? And the Postmaster General responded by creating city delivery service in our urban areas where letter carriers would go to the house and deliver the mail for these ladies so that if they had to grieve, they would grieve in the company of their family. And the system was, because there were no mailboxes at that time in letter drops, the postman would always knock, or if they had a doorbell, ring twice.
Jim Bruns is our guest. He's the author of 15 books and more than 150 articles, all on postal history and stamps. His new book came out late last year, Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. He's also a curator for the Smithsonian Institution. James Bruns, our guest. Hold that thought. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a question, you can call 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729, or you can text your question, and I'll work that into the conversation as well. You can text your questions to 1-844-2-McGraw. A fascinating article, a fascinating story about the Postal Service continues when we come back. America at Night.
Want to know what's coming up on America at Night? Text RUNDOWN to 844-262-4729. 844-2-McGraw for your daily show preview, delivered straight to your phone. You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
He's a curator of the Smithsonian Institution, and he's written numerous books and articles about the post office and postal history. Now, our guest this hour is James Bruns, and he's written a new book called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. James, we're talking. We'll stay in the Revolutionary days for a couple more minutes because it's just so fascinating. When the Continental Congress enacted the Postal Service, how fast could a letter get from, I don't know, Philadelphia to New York to Washington, D.C.? How long did it take?
It moved at a rate of about 4 miles an hour because it was principally sent on horseback. Our roads in the colonial period were so terrible because of stumps and potholes and mud and all kinds of crevices, and it just had to move very, very slowly.
Could one make the argument that if they didn't create the Postal Service, the Revolutionary War would have gone very differently?
Yeah, I think the American people would have not known about occurrences in other colonies. You had to remember there was no other communication system in the United States other than newspapers, and newspapers got to their subscribers by mail. And that's kept the nation informed. It also, because many postmasters were also newspaper publishers. They would get the mail from their recipients, and if there was a newspaper, they would copy down what was said in one colony and reproduce it in their newspaper in their colony. So it was the days before AP and UPI. It was a media service.
So the Postal Service delivered newspapers for the newspaper men. Yeah,
it was actually newspapers were delivered for free because they were so important to an informed electorate. They didn't have to pay a postage rate.
And did it cover the all 13 colonies, or did it just cover the major metropolitan areas?
Well, it covered the major metropolitan areas, but newspapers, as the colonies expanded and the populations moved westward and up and dispersed, newspapers and the mail went with them. That was the big thing, that the Universal Mail Service was to try to serve every American, irrespective of where they lived. And so there was, as soon as people moved out of an urban area to a sparse settlement, they would create a post office and their mail would be delivered to them.
Was there any model for this? Because I mean, was Europe well established in their postal service, or was this the first of its kind? What the United States was trying to do?
No, the United States copied what was being used overseas. We were a nation of copycats. We would take the best ideas from other nations, modify them to make them American, and implement them here. Our postmarks were based on the British system in the 1700s. The postcard was modeled after Italy. The postage stamp was modeled after Great Britain. We emulated a lot of the innovations, and we created some of our own too as we went along.
I remember back in college, Alex de Tocqueville, didn't he at some point comment or write about how well respected the U.S. Postal Service was and how that was part of the defining image of the United States?
Yeah, he did, because it was such a universally acclaimed service and everybody loved it. They still really do, regardless of some bad-mouthing of snail mail. American people look forward to what's in their mailbox. And it was even more so in the colonial period, where news was so important to an informed people. And that's the way the news got to them.
Let's talk about the Pony Express. A lot of texters want me to ask you about the Pony Express. Tell me, right from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, tell me about the Pony Express.
Pony Express was the northern alternative to the overland stagecoach route. During the 1850s, the Postmaster General, who was a Southerner at the time, determined that mail to the West would go by a southern mail route down through the South, looping through the territories and up to California. And Northerners realized that with all this talk of secession in the South, they couldn't rely on a Southern-dominated post route to California with all its gold and its population density for that time because of the gold rush. So they had to come up with a quick alternative between the time it would take to get mail to the West Coast and also to connect the transcontinental telegraph to California. The key was to keep California in the Union and not make it go south. So they came up with the Pony Express. It was run by Russells, Wardell, and Majors as a private company. Never really carried much mail, but it was extremely fast. The letters were basically business letters because they were written on tissue, the paper being so thin because of the weight. And the mail was kept in a saddle bag that was called a mochila. It had 4 pockets, only one of which could be opened along the way. And in those pockets would be stashed all the letters. And the young riders were hired. They were to be wiry young men. Orphans were preferred. So if the young man got killed along the way, well, there's no grieving parents to worry about. He just, would be replaced.
Hold that thought. This is fascinating. James Bruns, our guest. He is the curator at the Smithsonian Institute. He is also an expert and wrote 15 books, more than 150 articles, all about the postal history. His new book is out, and it is a read that you cannot put down. It's called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. James Bruns is our guest. If you would like to ask him a question, you can certainly text your question to 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729, or you can give us a call and we'll try and sneak you in. But James Bruns, more with the history of the Postal Service. America at Night, back in a moment.
Relax. You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. Relax. You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
Texts are coming in fast and furious. Everyone's got questions about the Postal Service. Our guest is James Bruns, Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. It's a book that came out in September. He is a curator for the Smithsonian Institute, has written numerous books about the Postal Service. James, we were talking about the Pony Express. How long did it take to go from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California?
Letter could get to across from St. Joe to Sacramento in about 16 days. That was lightning speed at those days. And the route, of course, it did not go south. It was a central route that skirted Southern controlled territory. And the young riders would change horses about every 20 miles or so and get a fresh pony to ride. There are a lot of misconceptions. Did they carry rifles? Did they carry guns? They carried neither. In many cases, they only had a knife because it was the horse, the pony, that was expected to get them out of trouble because it was such a fast pony, and they were always kept fresh. That's why they relayed and changed horses so often.
How many trips did they go back and forth? I mean, was it a constant? Was it a constant convoy of horses? I mean, how many trips were made a day?
Well, it was a marathon, and you might have one rider set off, and then half a day later or a day later, another rider set off, and they would go in both directions simultaneously. So it was a marathon.
Yeah. How long was the Pony Express in existence for?
Only about a year and a half before the telegraph got connected and messages could be sent from the east to the west and vice versa by telegraph. And then, of course, everything changed with the Transcontinental Railroad, which was linking the east and the west in 1869.
You brought up a great point, or you spurred a great point that I don't think I've ever even thought about. During the Civil War, right? You were mentioning this Pony Express was they wanted a northern route. During the Civil War, did the South have their own postal service, and how did the North handle that?
Initially, when the southern states began to secede, the North allowed mail to continue to flow south. And it got to a point in 1861 where the North said no more. The South created its own postal service. It appointed John Regan from Texas as their first postmaster general. Regan had initially turned it down, the offer to be the postmaster general, 5 times because he said he would never be able to create a system as up to date and as modern and as convenient as the Union's postal system. So he didn't want to accept the job because he'd be seen as a failure. But Regan did accept the job ultimately. And one of his first assignments, he appointed a number of agents to come north and to talk with pro-Southern postal employees to woo them to the South, and so that he could create his own postal service. But part of the deal was these pro-Southern postal employees were to bring every postal document that they could have at their disposal, contracts, ledgers, forms, every possible document and marking devices and other things, so that they could replicate how the North did their service just by taking a Northern document and changing the United States Post Office Department to Confederate States of America Post Office Department. So he literally created a postal system overnight, but it was never as good as the Northern postal system.
James, you said you were a collector of stamps. When did stamps become part of the Postal Service?
In 1840, the British issued its first postage stamp, and it depicted the Queen, at that time Victoria. The United States began copying postage stamps, provisional stamps. In the 1840s, local postmasters would do their own stamps, but the official postage stamps for the United States were first issued in 1847. They depicted George Washington on the 10 cent and Benjamin Franklin on the 5. Franklin because he was the father of the Postal Service, Washington because he was the father of our country. And the size of the postage stamp is basically 1 square inch roughly. That was determined by what you could lick in one fell swoop of your tongue.
10 cents a stamp? That seems awful expensive.
Well, it was the rate depended upon the distance and the weight of the letter. It was expensive.
Yeah, interesting. You say that because now they have forever stamps. But for as long as I can remember, the price of a stamp was to anywhere from across the street to across the country. It was one price for any piece of mail. When did that come into existence?
Well, the prices hovered and gone up and gone down. And of course, during the Civil War, we demonetized all of our postage stamps. Demonetizing means that they're no longer of value. And we had to do that because the South had over $5 million in postage stamps held by Southern post offices. And, the North couldn't have $5 million of its revenue in Southern controlled hands that was in secession and revolution against the Union government. So it demonetized all the stamps at that time and issued a new set of stamps that took its place. The interesting thing about John Regan, the postmaster for the Confederacy, is he had all the postmasters in the South send all their stamps to him in Montgomery and Alabama and then Richmond, Virginia. And what Regan did is he went to the cabinet in the Confederacy and said, we can't have the franking privilege like they have in the North. It's ruining the Postal Service. All these agencies can send their mail for free. We've got to have it where every agency of the Confederate government pays literally their postage. And they all agreed, and Reagan began using Union postage stamps and embossed stamped envelopes that were confiscated and sent to Richmond for him as how he would pay his mail. So he was paying Confederate Postage Service rates using Union stamps. And the other cabinet members were furious, but Reagan said, what's fair is fair.
Yeah. When did the franking privileges extend to Congress?
It always has been to Congress. Since the early days of the Republic, the franking privilege has always been there, and it's always been abused. We had one member of Congress that from Tennessee who sent all of his laundry by post office department for washing and laundering and then returned to Washington. And the Postmaster General at the time calculated, he said it would take 15 horses in addition to what I'm currently sending to Tennessee just to carry this guy's wash back and forth under the franking privilege. But it was allowed.
When did the motto, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night, how did that come about?
It was from a poem, and it was inscribed upon the frieze of the New York Post Office, and it became an unofficial motto. The Post Office Department really doesn't have a motto.
Oh, interesting. Let's talk about the Post Office today. It's gone through quite a bit of trouble because of internet and mail being what it is. Do you see a future for the U.S. Postal Service?
Yeah, I do. When the telegraph was created, Samuel Morse was actually a postal employee, and the Postal Service hoped to dominate the telegraph. And everybody said, oh, there goes the mail. The telegraph's going to replace it. But it didn't. Mail volume arose. When the telephone was invented, people said, well, there goes the Postal Service. The telephone will replace the mail. And no, mail volume increased. The Postal Service actually developed the fax system, but lost it because of the way that it categorized fax transmissions. And now with email, parcel deliveries are increasing and becoming the predominant medium of the mail system. So the Postal Service has always evolved to meet the demands of the letter writing and mailing public. And I see parcel delivery being the key in the future, with people ordering by email and online and getting deliveries to their mail. And you have to remember that there is only one service that serves every address every day, and it's not FedEx and UPS. It's the United States Postal Service.
And that was my next question. I'm sure there's somebody out there saying, we have UPS, we have FedEx. Do we really need a postal service anymore?
You absolutely do, because they skim the cream. They go the routes that are profitable. I'm hearing now with all these discussions about let's close unprofitable post offices and eliminate unprofitable mail routes. That is the exact reason why the United States Post Office Department was created in the founding of our republic. It was never expected to make money. It was always expected to be there as a public service to keep all Americans informed and served. And so you cannot eliminate rural mail service, the very people that rely on the mail the most, and close rural post offices. It just won't work. If you think about it, McGraw, almost everything that goes to Alaska goes by mail. Who's going to take that mail to Alaska?
What about like Saturday delivery they talk about canceling? Do you think that's a possibility?
It may be a possibility so that, they don't have mail service on the weekend. We had a major dispute in the 1830s and 1840s about mail service on Sundays. The debate at that time was that the mail should stop and not move. Nobody should move any mail on Sundays. And the Postal Service insisted that that's an impossibility because mail on Monday is prepared for service and delivery on Saturday and Sunday. So you cannot just close off one day. eliminating Saturday service may help, but it's a spit in the sea.
Yeah, and I also think your point is, even though communication being what it is, it built the nation, and it continues to keep us connected in all sorts of ways. How does magazines? I know magazines have taken it on the chin, but magazines. I love my woodworking magazines that I get, or my young daughter gets magazines in the mail, and there's all sorts of things that are still used through the mail, and that's sort of the fabric of this country, even 250 years later.
Yeah, our tax returns comes by mail. The COVID, how did those medical supplies get to us? It came by mail. And selective service, alien registration, food stamps, postal banking, which we used to have. In fact, postal banking was the only solvent banking system during the Great Depression. It was your money in the post office banks was backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. That wasn't true with a lot of the banks that people had their money in. They went under. There's so many services that the post office department provides that we take for granted.
So hold on a second. I didn't know that. The bank, there was a postal banking service. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. It was developed in this country about 1911, and it had deposits from all over the country. You could go to the post office. That was your bank. You would deposit your pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters from the socks you had under your mattress or the tin can you had in your larder, and save your money with your post office. And the post office would, kept your ledger and your book, and, would give you your money when you needed it. So when the Depression struck and all these banks went under, the post office was a reliable bank that you always got your money from the post office. The same was true with money orders. Money orders developed during the Civil War as a way for Union soldiers to send their money safely back home. Postal money orders are extremely valuable to people even today.
The book is called Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. It came out in September. James Bruns is a curator at the Smithsonian Institute and the author of that book, author of 15 books, more than 150 articles. And tell me again, you took over for your father as what? What were you hired for? What was your father's job?
My father was a curator of postal history and philately for the Smithsonian Institution. He died in 1979. I applied for his job, and because I had grown up in the Smithsonian's collections as a young man, I knew the collections better than anybody, and so the Smithsonian hired me to take my father's position.
James Bruns, what an extraordinary story. What a great story. Thank you for sharing it. The book is Delivering for America. If you have a fan of American history and America, this is the book for them. Delivering for America, How the United States Postal Service Built a Nation. James Bruns. James, thank you very much for a very enjoyable hour.
Thank you.
You've got it. America at Night. Back in a moment.
America at Night with McGraw Milhaven, where the nation comes to talk.
Hey, if you're interested, through the magic of radio, you can turn this whole show into a podcast. Just sprinkle a little pixie dust, and poof, it's a podcast. Because no one likes talk radio, but everybody loves a podcast. Download America at Night with McGraw Milhaven, where all fine podcasts can be found. Very simple. Just go to any one of the platforms. There are all sorts of out there. We are on all of them. And just do a search for America at Night with McGraw Milhaven, or just America at Night, and it'll pop up. Hit the follow button, and it'll get sent right to your device. Then you can have the show and listen, and you can listen again. And if you miss a night, shame on you. But then you can listen to it, go back and listen to something. You heard something, you want to hear it again. You want to send it on to a friend? All available where all fine podcasts are found. Just do a search for America at Night, and boom, it's a podcast. It's as simple as that. Welcome to the 21st century. All right, we got open phones next hour. Text messages are flying. Phone calls are flying. We'll take all comers. We never screen, never have, never will. And that's all coming up next hour. What a fun night. Quick 2 hours. 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729. People are already lining up, so you can get in now. Text messages are open. Stay right there. Our executive director tonight is Alex Hinton. Our engineer tonight is Richard Good. I'm McGraw Milhaven, and this is America at Night on Westwood One.
Westwood One presents America at Night. Here's your host, McGraw Milhaven.
So I got to come clean. Last week, Bill on the road, Bill Cleveland, right, our Thursday segment, was talking about pickleball. And it was, he was talking about pickleball and how he's picked up pickleball and how he went to the world headquarters of pickleball, the first ever pickleball court somewhere in Washington, and that was a nice segment. Well, tonight I'm flipping channels, and all of a sudden, I think it was on ESPN, they had a pickleball tournament with none other than Andre Agassi. And I was watching this pickleball tournament with Andre Agassi, the famed tennis star Andre Agassi. It was actually kind of enjoyable. Andre's running around. It was like two men. It was him, and I want to say it was Jeff Blake. There was another. It was Blake. There was a tennis player named Blake. I mean, it was Jeff Blake, John Blake, but they were playing two women. Steffi Graf, his wife, was sitting there in the front row cheering him on. But Andre Agassi and another tennis player were playing two women in this pickleball match. It was quite enjoyable. So, Bill Cleveland, a man before his time. All right. Phone numbers are as follows. 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729. Boy, we've had an interesting hour, interesting show. We had Ed Martin, President Trump's pardon attorney, was on the show, and never a dull moment when he's on the show. Brings a whole lot of energy to the show. And then last hour we were talking about the Postal Service. But those are topics we touched on, but the truth is we can talk about anything your little heart desires. We can go rogue. I would appreciate it if you to change topics. Nobody likes to be a one-trick pony. You know who I'm talking about. And we'll go to the phones. 1-844-2-McGraw. Text line is alive and well. We'll get to some of those a little bit later on. 1-844-2-McGraw. That's 1-844-262-4729. Programming note, tomorrow on the show, we are going to be talking with former UN ambassador and former senator of Missouri, John Danforth, is going to be joining us, and Bill on the road is going to join us. And then I'm taking Friday off. Dan Mandis is going to be filling in for me. I got a daddy-daughter dance I must attend on Friday night, so that's the plan for the rest of the week. Let's go to Scott in St. Louis. Scott, you are on America at Night. Thanks for joining us.
It looks like the Israeli security cabinet, they're talking about a ceasefire with Lebanon or with Hezbollah. And also Hezbollah, in one of their newspapers, they mentioned the possibility of a ceasefire. So that's good news, maybe, And also,
That's real good news. Also good news that the markets have been up surprisingly over the last couple of weeks, or the last week or so. So the NASDAQ, I think, hit a record. The S&P hit a record today, I think. Dow Jones is at 48,463. So the markets have taken a turn and an uptick since this ceasefire. So that's good news too, I guess.
Yeah, it's good as long as Trump doesn't screw it up,
Well, I mean, there's a lot of optimism. Who knows? Who knows where this thing goes? Nobody can predict the future with this guy.
That's true. He's very unpredictable.
Yes. You, however, are very predictable. You got to start bringing some more topics to the table here, Scott.
I know I should, man. I should. Well, one thing is, the fact that St. Louis County and St. Louis City are not merged, are not one government.
Yes.
That's I think that's a legacy of the Civil War. Because they didn't want to combine because one side was pro-slavery and the other side was against slavery.
Well, I don't want to get into the inner workings of St. Louis City and St. Louis County because the larger audience really doesn't care. But
they don't care.
No, they don't care. Matter of fact, people in St. Louis really don't care. But I think it was. I think it was more of a manifestation of the people in St. Louis City didn't like the corrupt government of St. Louis County and thought, why do we need these people? Let's just take as much land as we want, and we'll never have to deal with those rural yahoos ever again. And then after they separated, somebody invented the car, and they started driving out, and now the bulk of the population is in the county, and they're turning their back on the city. Hey, Scott, I got to go.
Yeah.
Thanks for the phone call. Paul in Boise. Paul, welcome to America at Night.
Thank you.
Paul. Hi,
How
Paul.
are you tonight, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for calling.
Yeah. The Ed Miller was his name?
Ed Martin.
Martin. Okay, I got to write that down. And does he work there at the White House?
I don't know if he works at the White House. He worked at the Justice Department. I don't know where his office is, but now he works in the pardon office.
So you would need to get a note to him to have him send not a pardon, but
a commutation
paper.
Well, yeah. Are you looking to get a pardon for yourself or for somebody else?
Well, two, maybe one for myself and one for a friend of mine. He was a gangbanger for many years, and he could really use it because he's at a stalemate in his life where he can't do nothing.
Paul, you hanging around a bunch of former gang members?
Well, there's one guy that I sponsor.
All right.
He could use the help. He's got a huge family. He's got 13 kids. He didn't know there was a thing called.
Well, here's what I would do. I'm certainly no expert, but he did mention, and you can go back and listen to it on the podcast, or he did mention that there is a website where you can actually officially apply for a pardon. So I'd do a little research and do a little Googling, and maybe you can find that. I'll see if I can find it, but he mentioned something like that in the show, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I would start there, Paul.
Thank you very much for the tip. I appreciate it. And another thing, keep up the good work. We don't always expect what we get, but we get what we need. And you supply most of that. You're an enjoyable host.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Nice words. Catherine in California. Catherine, welcome to America at Night.
I'm sorry, McGraw. Thank you for taking my call. You have, to preface, you have great guests, and my head is spinning by the end of the hour. I'd like to talk about the USPS, but the purpose of my call tonight was your prior guest about the smart meters, etc.
Yeah, for those who weren't listening, it was, or who missed it, there was a report out in the Hill tonight in which there's a report that many of these smart devices, the refrigerators, the doorbells, the Chinese companies have some type of device in there or software, hardware that is able to sort of control our phones, listen to us, spy on us in all sorts of ways. Yeah. Go ahead.
George Orwell, 1984.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm older, not that much, but a bit older. All right. I promise I'll be brief. Why was I compelled to call in on this is I have zero. I don't have Siri, Alexa. I don't do any of that. I literally about 11 months ago, I'm in Southern California, so SCE, Southern California Edison. I actually had them remove the smart meter they installed in my home without my permission, by the way. And I have, if you'll allow me, why did I do that?
Smart meters for your water, for your electricity. What were these smart meters for?
Southern California Edison is electricity.
Oh, okay. So your electrical meters. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So there's not one. Skip water. Thank you, McGraw. But anyway, I had it removed. Why? Is for the very reason your guest mentioned. I'm not talking about China or what. The point is that not only is that invasive to our everyday lives, however, the good news, may I, is that my bill dropped 50%.
After you took the meter out?
Yes, and I can scan the email it to you if you want.
No, I believe you. I believe you. Catherine, I got to go. I got a break, but thank you very much. It's good to know.
Right,
take the smart meters out and your energy bills drops. That works for me. Hold that thought. 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729. America at Night. More phone calls, more text lines. Back in a moment.
Call now. 844-262-4729. That's 844-2-McGraw. You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
Hey, don't forget you can text your comments in 1-844-2-McGraw in New York. They write in, I'm telling everyone about your show. Many are listening and happy to have you on the radio. Thank you. Here's another one from Illinois. Thank you for being a historian. I'm so glad I learned how mail was started in our homes. Yeah, that was an unbelievable story. Did anybody have any idea that the letter carrier got started because women during the Civil War went to the post office to pick up their mail, and that's how they learned that they had become widows and that their husband had died in the line of duty? And they said there's got to be a better way to tell the women that their husbands died, not in public, so they decided to create letter carriers to bring the letters to the women of the Civil War, so that when they got word that their husband died, they were able to learn that news with dignity in their own homes. And that's how the letter carrier began. Man, history is an amazing thing, isn't it? Let's go to Robert in Connecticut. Robert, welcome to America at Night.
Yes, thank you again for picking up my call.
Sure.
And just to follow up, ironically, did you ever hear the term widow's nest?
Widow's nest.
It's in the middle of a house, which they have where the women would look for the military or somebody coming, and they knew when they're coming down, it ain't good news. But anyway, that's the
well,
purpose.
no, yeah, well, hold on a second. Like a house in Nantucket where the women would climb up to the rooftop.
Exactly. And there's windows all around.
Yeah, it was a platform, and
they
could
don't sleep there.
And they could see if the ships were coming in. I think that was called a widow's nest.
Yeah.
I thought a widow's nest.
No, I'm not saying not in Nantucket. They have this in Poughkeepsie, and they have them up in all around, everywhere. All the old houses. That's called a widow's nest. But anyway, that's not the purpose I called. I have a better joke. Oh, and am I predictable?
Yes, you are.
Okay, that's good. I have bad jokes, but I have a better one today, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. Besides, I have a couple other things. Here's a joke. First one. Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly are going to counsel the Pope on the Bible studies. No, that's not the joke. But here's the real joke. How come, don't laugh, how come, and don't let your heart be troubled. And how come they don't pass the plate in a synagogue?
Like I don't know. Why don't they pass the plate in a synagogue?
Because the money never gets past the third person.
All right, that's enough, Robert. I don't like those jokes. I don't like those jokes. That's not funny.
Okay, I talked to my buddy, and he got upset about me, and I rattled his cage because I asked him, "You think China and Russia is going to let the United States take over Venezuela's oil, then take over Iran's oil, and they're going to orchestrate they're taking over Cuba. And my buddy says, yeah, China and Russia don't have a problem with that. And I'm like, I think they might. Well, I don't know. Do you think, would you be mad?
Look, Robert, thanks for the phone call. I find it interesting. All this talk with China. Remember, Trump was supposed to meet with President Xi at some point, right? And that was delayed. Now he's going to be meeting with him in the near future. I wouldn't be shocked if that thing's delayed as well. China is our frenemy. We put tariffs on them. We took the tariffs off. President Trump's been all over the place. Yeah, we were supposed to meet with them, and then they canceled the meeting or pushed it back. So I would not be shocked if that whole thing has been canceled because of this current situation in the Gulf. Look, who knows how this is going to play out. President Trump said today more talks are imminent, apparently. Talking is good. And the markets have responded like they know something we don't know. So there's some optimism in the markets. Just get a deal. Just get a deal and get it over with. We don't need another story today that more troops are going to the area. We don't need any more troops in the area. Just cut a deal and get over with, and let's get back to normal. We need this like we need a hole in the head. Joe and Tony, hold their thoughts. We'll get to you. 1-844-2-McGraw, 1-844-262-4729. Texts and phone calls continue. America at Night. Back in a moment.
You're listening to America at Night with McGraw Milhaven. Join the conversation. Call 844-2-McGraw. America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
Hey, some news tonight about Live Golf. Live Golf, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, is on the verge of announcing that he will withdraw financial support, or they will withdraw financial support from Live Golf. Live Golf has been around for about 4 years. They threw a whole lot of money at some high-profile golfers to leave the PGA Tour, and some of them did. Some stayed. Tiger stayed. Rory stayed. Mickelson left. I think Bubba Watson left. Brooks Koepka left. A couple of others left. And it's divided. It was huge rift in pro golf. And they signed them for mega deals. And, after 4 years, I don't know if the Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is going in a different direction or what, but their idea of how they were going to, remember that phrase they were using, sports washing, where they were going to clean up their image by investing in sports? Who knows? But the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia apparently getting out of the golf game. You wonder what happens to all those guys who left the PGA Tour and how welcome they'll be back. I'm sure there's a whole lot of bruised egos and hurt feelings, so we'll see how all that turns out. But that's interesting news. Danny and Rolla. Danny, welcome to America at Night.
Hey, I just wanted to, you and I had a little bit back and forth on the via text last night, and you had said that when somebody makes a settlement, it's basically an admission of guilt. But
hold on a second. For those who weren't paying attention, I think we were talking about Eric Swalwell, right? And how I forget how this came up. Well, obviously it was in the news, and we were talking about Swalwell, and even though he's presumed innocent and has denied the allegations, many people are acting like he's guilty. And I think you said something like innocent until proven guilty. And I said, well, yes, but and then somehow we got on. You brought up Clinton, and I said exactly or something. And then it somehow got to Trump or whatever. Yeah. But right. I think the point was, I think but hold on a second. People need to understand what we're talking about, because you and I just aren't having a conversation. We want to let other people in on the conversation. And I think I said something like, exactly with Bill Clinton agreeing with you. And then I said something about, Trump paying off Stormy Daniels, and you said he was never proven guilty. No, but if you're paying a adult film star money not to talk, that is pretty presumed to be guilty, even though you don't admit anything.
Well, yeah, actually last night all I talked about was baseball on the air. But you are correct. But the thing is, it's kind of like if you get gangrene in your little toe, you cut it off. You don't let it infect your foot and then your leg. And with many people, Trump had 2 accusers in 10 years. That it was also a he said, she said. Swalwell has multiples of that in a very short span. So even though I do believe that Swalwell is innocent until proven guilty, and he should have his day in court, to resign from the Senate,
House.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And also, I would give a little advice, and it's worth exactly what you pay for it, to some of your listeners, that they should probably make a recording of themselves and what they want to speak about before they call in, because some of them just sound like they don't have a clue. Hopefully, I mean, I'm all for intelligent discourse, but when you say something that's just off the rails, come back to earth, people. Have a good night, folks.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks.
Later.
You got it. Thanks for the phone call. President Trump has been accused of sexual misconduct by numerous women. And that's exactly what they are. They are allegations, just like Eric Swalwell. I don't want to get into this game because, as I said day one, people will argue People will argue about allegations that women make depending on, you'll believe the woman depending on who she's alleging. If you don't like Eric Swalwell, yeah, you believe the women. If the women make an allegation against a politician you like, you believe the man. That's just the way the game's played today. So I'm not going to get into this he said, she said, you said, I said, they said. But when Monica Lewinsky made the allegations before it was proven, right, you believed or didn't believe based on it. Eric Swalwell, actually, I think Democrats are probably, I don't know, Eric Swalwell doesn't have too many friends today or too many people who are defending his actions. But the sad reality is the Eric Swalwell story isn't the allegations, even though it is. The story is that the House of Representatives knew about it. They're all saying it was, everybody knew. His good friend, Ruben Gallego, the senator from Arizona, he's like, oh, my goodness, he was a good friend. I heard the rumors. I just didn't believe them. Why not? Because you like the guy. But if there was rumors about Kevin McCarthy, you would have been much more apt to call foul. But when he's in your party, or he's your politician, or she's your politician, you don't believe the woman. You only believe the woman depending on who the allegation is. That was the point I was making originally. Joe in Arkansas. Joe, welcome to America at Night.
Hey, Alex just informed me that I thought we were asking questions live, and I kind of figured that was the last hour with Mr. Marks, and then
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I had a question in both interviews. Excellent, by the way. Number one, on the pardons, I always understood my understanding of the law, and that's kind of contractual in nature, and if you don't accept it or you absolutely refuse it, I was going to ask him how could it be that a pardon would be valid. It's kind of a transaction, offer and acceptance. So I don't quite get that. I've talked to a lot of lawyers, and half of them agree with me, and half of them don't.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
It's a really interesting debate whether if you get a pardon from a president, you don't have to accept it, but if you accept it, are you admitting guilt? It's a great debate, and this one case, apparently, with so many other court cases, you can read it the way you want to read it. I've talked to some lawyers throughout the years, and they have always said that you can reject a pardon, but if you accept a pardon, that is an admission of guilt. I don't know, but I see both sides of the argument. I could see how, maybe somebody really is innocent, and the only way to get them out of jail is a pardon. They have to admit guilt, even though they're innocent. So, it's an interesting debate.
I can see that, but on principle, now when I was in court and I stacked up a dozen traffic tickets, and I was unable to pay them because there's nothing, no lawful money of account to pay them in. So I argued my case for 2 years, and the judges and lawyers couldn't figure out how to get me. Finally, the prosecutor says, you know what? This guy's been doing this stuff for 15 years, and I know him well. He's not going to budge. I want to step in, make them all $100, and I want to step forward and pay it. Well, the judge says, okay, but you know about Joe. He's probably not going to consent or agree to this contractual in nature situation, because I brought that up a lot. And he says, how are we going to do this, Joe? We need to get you out of here and discharged. And the prosecutor, I won't use his name, but he is going to pay your fines. Now, he says, I said, well, the only thing I know to tell you, no, I'm not going to consent to a bunch of guilties here, but I will. How about to help the taxpayers of this county and the court resolve this? I will simply not object.
All right, hold on a second. Go ahead.
He looked at the prosecutor and he said, that will work. Goodbye.
All right.
Good.
Joe, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Were you guilty of those traffic tickets?
I was driving without a valid license for about 20 years, and I studied that out. And by the way, the stagecoach that delivered the mail, the driver business got started right there. They needed a licensed person to drive the coach, and then a licensed security guard called Shotgun.
Okay,
and they hold gold and passengers for hire. Now, I'm going to tell you something. As late as the 50s, there are cases on the books. A bunch of us proved it right in court, and they couldn't get around it. But the big issue that I asked them for a deferral. How about we defer all the fines until lawful money of account appears? And the judge says that ain't never going to happen. We've got legal tender laws now, but you're going by the Coinage Act, which is gold and silver at so many grams at par, and they can't beat it.
Listening to you, Joe. Joe,
I know,
Joe.
but here's my point. They cannot beat that issue, and my point is, almost everything in court is contractual in nature, and I would think a pardon is as well. Wouldn't you?
I don't know. I got a headache in this conversation.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Anyway, I'm out of here. I think Tony's next, ain't he?
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the phone call. He lost me in that one. I live under the philosophy of if I get a speeding ticket, I'm guilty, pay the man. I get a parking ticket, I park the car, pay the man. Though I was ornery when it came to those red light cameras. In St. Louis and in Missouri for a while, they never took a picture of the person driving the car. They only took a picture of the license plate. And I refused to pay those red light camera tickets because they couldn't prove it was me driving the car. And so I was steadfast in my defiance. Ultimately, I won. I never paid him. And then ultimately, the judges and the courts all threw it out, said it was unconstitutional. And the court said, you got to take a picture of the driver to make him legal. All right, we got enough time to check in with Tony. Tony in Montreal, welcome to America at Night. Good morning, Tony.
Yes, hi. How are you? Every time I call, I get sidetracked because these comments are really interesting, especially the ones with tickets. Just to give you an idea, I got a ticket through one of those, cameras, and the ticket was sent to me multiple, almost a year later. It was in Ottawa, Canada, the city, our capital. I've never paid it. It's about 15 years ago. And I said the same thing. How do you know I was driving? My kids have my cars up in Ottawa, etc. Give me a picture of me driving the car and I'll pay for it. They couldn't do that, McGraw, so you're right on that. And it is a constitutional issue, but I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into that because the stuff that you're talking about, the legal questions, are boring. So is Swalwell's issues. They're boring. Clinton's issues are boring. All these sexual innuendos things against Trump are boring. All boring, and waste of time. So I want to talk about something a little bit more interesting that affects us every day. I want to talk about Italian genius. And I'm not talking about my genius. I have zero genius, but I like reading. And I follow my old president, Rels, Robert E. L. Strider of Colby College, said, you're on a serendipitous voyage the rest of your life. Start today on day one at Colby College. So I did a little serendipity today, and I found out that Bartolo Cristofori developed or invented the pianoforte, and he called it the Gravencembello piano e forte. Piano in Italian means soft. And today we just call the instrument piano. It used to be soft and loud or soft and strong. So today he invented the piano. And then we have Evangelista Tortoncelli, who invented the barometer in the 1600, which predicts the weather, which is something that you at the radio station usually, if you're in St. Louis, you're always talking about barometers and the weather. Then there's Alessandro Volta, who invented the electric battery, and his name is sort of lives on today in the word volt. So electric batteries, from the battery in your flashlight to Elon Musk, owes this gentleman a little bit of kudos. Then you have Guillermo Marconi, who invented the radio and laid the groundwork. He laid the groundwork for wireless communications, which became cell phones and even Wi-Fi. And then last but not least, you have Antonio Mucci, who invented the telephone long before Bell did. And I just want to say these are important things that we use every day. You as a person on the radio, you use most of these instruments every day, and we don't even know where they came from. But these are inventions from the 16th century, 1600s and 1700s, and it comes from one country. It comes from Italy. And sometimes we forget that these countries have developed great inventions that we use today. And I thought it might be interesting for me to bring that up today. Of course,
all right.
I being Italian and St. Louis having great Italian food, I figured that might be interesting to a guy like you.
Tony in Montreal, good stuff as always. Thanks for checking in. You forgot my favorite Italian, Galileo Galilei, who was able to figure out that the sun did not revolve around the earth, but that the earth revolved around the sun. And he did it without Google Maps. Think about that for a second. He was able to look up in the sky and figure that out. Now, that's actually pretty smart. They threw him in jail for it, too. The Catholic Church threw him in jail. And the Catholic Church finally apologized to Galileo Galilei. And you know when they apologized to him? He lived in the 1500s, died in the 1600s, and they apologized to him, I want to say like 2005. The Catholic Church apologized for throwing Galileo Galilei in jail for the blasphemous idea that the earth revolved around the sun. America at Night, back in a moment.
Follow America at Night wherever you get your podcasts and never miss a conversation that matters.
All right, we're about done. Tomorrow night on the show, former Senator John Danforth is going to be joining us. That is something you are not going to want to miss. Very distinguished man, theologian, former UN ambassador, and United States Senator. John Danforth is going to be joining us tomorrow night. Hey, also don't forget, we turn these shows into podcasts. We're very magical that way. We're very special. Not everybody can turn their radio show into a podcast, but we can do it. We have the special powers. And so all we do is go to where any and all podcasts are housed, do a search for America at Night, and poof, the show becomes a podcast. So if you missed one, you missed an hour, you want to go back and hear something, it's all available. Podcasting available. Download it right to your device. All right, we are done. Don't forget, you can text us, 1-844-2-McGraw, and get a show lineup each and every day. Send us your phone number, and we'll text you that each and every day. You can text us, 1-844-2-McGraw, or 1-844-262-4729. We're done for the night. What a fast night. Thanks to Ed Martin, and thanks to our Smithsonian Institute curator, who was a fascinating look at the post office, James Burns. Our executive director tonight is Alex Hinton. Our engineer tonight is Richard Good. I'm McGraw Milhaven, and this is America at Night on Westwood One.